Okay, well, look, does anybody listening fancy a free case of beer? Because we only ask...
Me, sir.
Yes, we can sort that out, sir. We only ask because we've just been sent one each by the wonderful Beer 52, and we thoroughly recommend it. Now, sign up with them, and they will send you a monthly different assortment of fantastic, original, and unusual craft ales from all over the world to try, plus some bar snacks and a copy of the excellent Ferment magazine.
Yes, because it's not just from all over the world. It's actually this lot that you and I were sent are from Yorkshire.
Well, they are. I got a haul of 8, which included Hopical Storm, Raven Hill, Vocation. These are such great names, aren't they? Gold Rush, which is from Ossett in Yorkshire. Surely your old stomping ground.
Who else is from Ossett in Yorkshire? Okay, Ossett in Yorkshire doesn't have many claims to fame. Okay, one is Stan Barstow, the novelist who wrote The Kind of Loving. The other is David Peace, the guy who wrote the Red Riding trilogy and so forth. And the third writer is actually me. I'm going to claim that.
Absolutely right.
And the fourth claim to fame, actually no, it should be higher than the third claim to fame, is the Ossett Breweries, which is represented in our sample there.
It is, along with the Botanicalist, which describes itself as proper Yorkshire goodness. And the only one that I've drunk so far, which is one called That's My Bag Baby. Feisty brew. Did you see that one?
I went with that one as well. Yeah,
very Austin Powers.
My wife proved very keen on that, actually. Every night when she comes home, she goes, are you going to open another beer?
Another can she's
showing more interest in beer than she normally does, which I don't know whether to take that as a good thing. Anyway, that's the deal.
No, it's great, and it's powerfully fruity, that one. And we've come a long way since the days when you and I used to drain ales from dimple jugs in the 70s. And I thought that I would test you out. The thing I remember most about those beers is the advertising slogans.
Absolutely.
I thought I was going to mention 2 or 3 and see if you can remember the slogans, right? So What was the Double Diamond slogan?
A double diamond works wonders, works wonders, works wonders. Double diamond works wonders. So try one today.
That's absolutely right. Whitbread Pale Ale. Do you remember that one?
I don't really.
Whitbread Pale Ale had a poster campaign, The Charge of the Light Brigade.
Oh, really? Okay.
Remember those? Crimean light cavalry having a cheeky half. Well, becoming cannon fodder or whatever. Guinness had 2. Do you remember the Guinness ones?
Well, Guinness is good for you. Is
Guinness is good for you. It's fantastic. I was a bloke in a cloth cap trying to retrieve a pint of Guinness that had been nabbed off him by some wild animal, usually a crocodile or a lion or a rhino or something. And also Guinness for Strength. Do you remember that? The Frog Man?
Yeah.
With balancing a whale on his little finger.
Guinness for Strength, actually, the one I remember, I've seen it loads of times, is a chap walking along actually holding an enormous great iron girder. Above his head.
I remember that.
Having had a pint of Guinness.
They're really good. Yeah. And the last one was Mackerson. Can you remember Mackerson?
Oh, well, Mackerson was... No, I can't remember the slogan.
Mackerson, I think, was the voice of Sir Bernard Miles. I can't remember. The Mackerson was, it looks good, it tastes good, and by golly, it does you good. It does you good. Fantastic. I
don't think you're allowed to say any of those things about beer anymore.
No, you could. You could. And
they're all health claims.
They're all good for you.
You're not allowed to make those anymore.
Not remotely. Anyway, I know.
We're not making any of those about this particular beer.
We're not, but we are thoroughly recommending them. And if you fancy it, go to www.beer52.com/word and cover the meagre postage cost of £5.95 to claim your free case now. And if dark beer is not your thing, you can choose the light-only case, and you can simply pause or cancel anytime. So that is that address again, www.beer.numerical52.com/word for a free case. Do it. You know you want to.
Details below.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Mark, great news. I have a Stackwaddy game.
That is good news.
Courtesy of a member of the Massive, actually. This is sent to me by Blue Mountain via Twitter.
All right.
And I don't know if you probably haven't seen this, but I'm holding it up now, if you can see it. It's a page of live classifieds from the Melody Maker in January 1971. And so you've got a list of bands who are playing at the Lyceum, at the Chelsea Village, at the Sisters Club and University College London and so forth. And, of course, in most cases, the headliners are names that are still kind of familiar to us, even if they're likes of Every Which Way, which was formed by Blinky Davison when he left the Nice, as I'm sure you recollect. You know, it's got the likes of Argent and If and Barclay James Harvest and all those kind of people.
God, I saw Barclay James Harvest, I'm afraid.
But the names that are maybe less familiar and consequently more stack-waddy-able are the names of the support groups, okay? So I'm going to give you some names of support groups from this week in January 1971, all of which are real, apart from one.
Apart from one, which you have made up.
Okay.
Go on. Try me.
So supporting Skid Row at Big Brother at the Oldfield Tavern in Greenford were Track, T-R-A-K. T-R-A-K, Track. Okay. Yep. Supporting Barclay James Harvest at the Frugal Institute in London were Clog, C-L-O-G, Clog, okay? Supporting Daddy Longlegs at Sisters Club opposite Seven Sisters Tube were Gnidrolog. Gnidrolog. You got that one? Okay. Supporting Curved Air at the LSE were Highly Inflammable. Highly Inflammable. And finally, supporting the jazz rock combo If at the Resurrection Club in Salisbury were Sweet Slag. Sweet Slag. Okay, so you've got Sweet Slag, Gnidrolog, Track, Clog, and Highly Inflammable.
I'm highly inflammable. Well, look, I'm fairly confident that I'm right. So I'm going to give you my assessment, okay? Sweet Slag, it sounds ridiculous that there could have been a group with a name like that, but when you think of the Juicy Lucy cover and various other things, I think it's plausible. Highly Inflammable is just a rotten name, and it's just the sort of thing that would have been around at the time. Gnidrolog, I saw, I'm afraid, so I'm afraid to say I know that they do exist. Track, despite their terrible spelling, I think is plausible too. The one I'm absolutely 1,000% confident you made up, because it's the word clog, and that in 1971 people, among them probably me actually, were wearing white clogs.
And me.
I had a pair of clogs. They were terrible. Clogs and loons worn simultaneously. I think it's clog.
You're absolutely
right. Am I right? I'm sorry.
I made that one up.
No, that's good. That's very funny.
I actually forgot to give you another one, which was supporting Kevin Ayers and the whole world at the Temple in Wardour Street.
Yeah.
Were Crushed Butler.
That's a good name.
Butler.
That's a really good name, Crushed Butler.
Well, okay. If
that's
you say so.
It couldn't be more 1971, isn't it?
I suppose so.
It's just absurd, isn't it?
So thank you very much to Blue Mountain for sending that in.
You can date things precisely by those years, can't you?
You can.
There's a mate of mine who had a group in 1969 called Mr. Perkins and His Blue Hat. And that's just 1969. That couldn't have been 1971.
Yeah.
Crushed Butler. Excellent.
I had another idea for a Stoutwoody game, actually, which I haven't got around to doing, which is all groups in 1967, 8, 9 wrote at least one song, which is kind of in the tradition of semi-detached suburban Mr. Jones by Man for Man. You know, everybody wrote a satirical song about a man who wore a bowler hat, went to work every day. You know,
it had slightly music hall feel about it, a bit jaunty.
They all did it.
That's good.
And that ought to be easy to, to collect.
That's good. I like that.
Anyway, so what I've got to talk about, I was going to talk about, can I tell you the story of Ben Sidron?
Yeah, go on.
Are you familiar with Ben Sidron?
God, Ben Sidron. Well, he was I had one of his records once. Pianist. Was he a member of? He was a member of Steve Miller Band at the time of Recall the Beginning. Was it?
So he comes from Wisconsin. And the story is, so he's kind of, I don't know, he'd be about 76 or 77 now. Yeah. And he went to the University of Chicago in the early 60s, where he met and formed a group with Boz Scaggs and Steve Miller. And the group was called the Ardells.
Yes.
And they were quite popular in Chicago. But anyway, Boz and Steve decided that they were going to go out to San Francisco and wear the flowers in their hair and become successful. And Ben decided he wasn't going to do that because he wanted to continue with his university studies. So they went off to San Francisco, and Steve Miller Band became a big deal. And Ben Sidron kept in touch with them. And Ben Sidron eventually went to study at the University of Sussex in the UK. And so he was here when the Steve Miller Band turned up at Olympic Studios in Barnes to make their famous record Sailor and the one after, I think, with Glenn Johns. And so he was brought back in to play keyboard on a few things, but he wasn't really committed to the band. He just played with them occasionally, produced them and wrote songs for them and so forth. But anyway, at the end of all this, he went back to Wisconsin, which is where he spent pretty much the rest of his career, where he became a lecturer in music business at the university. And was also a regular on NPR, which is the kind of American BBC, if you like. Yeah. Where he used to present programs about jazz and so forth. So in between this, as you pointed out yourself, you used to make records, and I've got a few.
No, he did. I could slightly I'm thinking slightly jazz.
Absolutely. Imagine something in the idiom of Mose Allison.
That's right. No, I remember them.
Imagine an American Georgie fame is a quite
slightly
good,
satirical, Georgie little tune,
slightly tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
And anyway, I've got a few of these records, that I've picked up over the years, and I kind of like them and so forth. And then I noticed recently that there were records by a chap called Leo Sidran. I thought that's interesting. There must be a relation. And I looked it up. Sure enough, it's his son. And so I started looking into how many Ben Sidron and Leo Sidran records there were.
You're going to tell me there's 27.
I'm not, actually, Mark. So Ben Sidron has made records consistently since the early 70s in his own right. And I think it's fair to say that they are completely unblemished by the merest whisper of commercial success at any point.
What's funded that?
they've had very nice reviews. People like you and me have probably liked them when we've heard them, and then we haven't heard them again for 10 years or something like that. We thought, oh, there's Ben Sidron still making records and so forth. Anyway, I did a count up the other day. 34. Okay, Mark. God. 34 Ben Sidron albums. His son, Leo, I think has made 10, which is absolutely extraordinary. But here's the reason I wanted to just raise this subject. Yeah. This is ultimately not about Ben Sidron, although I do love Ben Sidron.
Yeah.
And I heartily recommend to anybody who's in the market for an American Georgie fame, Ben Sidron, go and listen to him. And let me tell you, you can go and listen to him, because this is the year 2023, and because streaming, and because Spotify, and because all these things that people curse and say don't pay enough money and so forth, and they'll never replace the record companies, every single one of those Ben Sidron records is available online right now for you to listen to. For nothing, or for whatever you pay, your streaming service or whatever. Now, I just think that's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary.
And if you say to me, I'd love to ask Ben Sidron, I'm sure he wishes that one of them had been a hit at some stage.
Yeah.
Which, if you make 34 records, there's a reasonable chance one of them might be a hit. And make a few quid. A few quid which you instantly spend on making the next one, which doesn't make any money or whatever. But would you rather one of them made a lot of money, or would you rather, in the latter half of your 70s,
all 34
be able to look there and go, that's my
life's work.
That's my life's work. It's all there. Anybody who wants to can listen to it. Look at what I did. I think that's just a remarkable
It's really
thing.
fantastic. What might happen, of course, is that a researcher on a film project or something might stumble across one of those and think, that's interesting and that fits this, and he might suddenly appear on a soundtrack, and suddenly people might start talking about him again, and suddenly, it all might pick up. You never know.
But I don't think it matters. I think what matters to people is that nowadays in music, you don't disappear. You don't disappear.
Yeah,
you don't disappear. You used to disappear. In the 70s and the 80s, people just completely disappeared.
Yeah.
Records came out, they got deleted, sold off or whatever, cut out. You might find them at a bargain bin, you probably wouldn't. And then you were never heard of again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays, thanks to the kind of, I suppose, the iron grip of copyright, some company somewhere is owning that stuff. And they just putting it out there, and in
the fond hope that there might be a tiny little profit in it as well. You never know.
Well, it only works if you've got it all together. And the thing that it struck me, I was thinking about this, and the thing that it struck me that the kind of streaming deal most resembles is not selling records, which was the old way. The thing it most resembles is the public lending right payment that you get as an author.
Yeah, when libraries once a year.
If you register with the libraries, they pay you once a year, and I'm sure J.K. Rowling's check will be very, very much worth having. Mine might pay for lunch, but I value it. It's great. And it's there there this year. It'll be there next year.
Yeah.
We publish another book. It'll be slightly more and so forth. That's what that's what Spotify and all these streaming services are like, rather than being like, the traditional sales that everybody always has back to. But anyway, so I just think to myself, Ben Sidron must just repair to his room regularly and just go and have a look.
Go and look, just see how many people have listened.
Well, to see if he's got any comments. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But to be able to go, I did all that. Yeah. Somehow I was allowed to make 34 records, and there they are.
My grandchildren never believed that I'd done all this, and now I can prove it.
Absolutely. Probably great-grandchildren in the case of Ben Sidron.
Yeah.
So, more power to him, and, more power to the streaming services for doing what they're doing, which is just making stuff available. Because for years, it wasn't.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
And we're joined now by our Patreon birthday boy, Chris Lintott. Chris, the birthday was months ago, wasn't it, really?
It was, but better late than never.
Absolutely. And so it's traditional that our birthday guests have a log to throw on the conversational fire, so to speak. And yours concerns disc jockeys, yes?
Yes, it does. And what they can do in terms of influencing taste, and how some of them can be extremely annoying and others you like despite yourself.
Right. So
who are your favourites?
I started off being very keen on John Peel. I used to listen to The Perfume Garden from Radio London under the nose. And that introduced me to a whole world of West Coast music. But then I think he got slightly determinedly obscurantist. So if it was obscure, Belgian nose flutes or whatever, he would play it. And silly things like 1 second tracks by Napalm Death. But on the other hand...
That made great radio, though. I remember him playing those. That was hilarious.
Like four moments of silence or whatever.
Yeah, I thought they were really funny.
Yeah, but he undoubtedly was extremely influential because he sort of fostered punk, didn't he?
You see, I'm going to go further. I think John Peel, very influential, not so much to do with music at all. John Peel, influential as a person, as a presence, as a personality, as a way of talking, as a whole generation of my generation, certainly, all modelled their way of speaking on John Peel. They all tried to lose their regional accents or whatever, and all started doing that nasal, rather deadpan thing, which John Peel himself had kind of invented.
He invented that because you ever hear the early recordings of him? He's actually quite posh.
Yes.
Well, he was posh. John Raven's guy. He was a public school boy, and he's his American recording is actually very posh. Here we are, listening in Dallas, listening to the Beatles, and then suddenly it was all this,
Yes.
and very, and I think I agree with Dave to some extent, because I think he invented the concept of the kind of professional amateur. A kind of slapdash amateur, because his whole thing was I sat in the studio and watched him broadcast sometimes. I think he deliberately put records on at the wrong speed. He deliberately put the wrong side on, just because it just made really good radio, and it just shored up the idea that he was not a daytime DJ.
Yeah, it brings the listener in. They think, there is the BBC actually making a mistake. Gosh, and I've spotted it.
Yeah, well, it's also saying this is late night radio. This is late night, not daytime, which are completely different animals.
The interesting thing is, and I Mike and I both spoke to John Peel on many occasions about stuff like this, and he would have stoutly denied being anything you might call a personality DJ, and yet he was. He was the biggest personality.
Probably more so than any of those daytime by a mile. That's why you listened, to hear what he had to say. Yeah. Not to hear his nose flutes being played.
Yeah. So that's John Peel. Now, who's your? You said you got a kind of. I think you said a prawn cocktail DJ.
Well, before we get on to that, I think Charlie Gillett was an amazingly influential DJ with his show on. Was it
Radio London?
Radio London.
Originally Radio London. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was fascinating.
Radio Ping Pong was his little slot. Do you remember that? People had to bring in records, and you played ping pong. You kind of said, "Well, I hear your Mose Allison track, and I raise you this."
I think that was just. I learned so much from those programs, and he did think that he broke Dire Straits, didn't he?
He did. Well, he played he played the recording, and that was in the days. And it was only on Radio London, because this was before the massive proliferation of radio. And so I think Chris Briggs, who was the A&R man, I think it was Chris Briggs, or Dave Bates, I can't remember, just happened to be listening and rang him up and said, "Who's that?" And then Phonogram signed Dire Straits, and then went on to sell squillions of records, all as a result of Charlie Gillett having played that in the first.
It was a demo they sent him, wasn't
it? Yeah.
Cassette.
So what about your prawn cocktail then? You got a guilty pleasure DJ, I bet.
Here it is.
Oh yeah, Tony. Well, we're
don't be guilty.
We're very fond of him.
I think
he plays great music. He plays great enthusiasm.
Hugely enthusiastic.
Yeah, and he just makes for great radio, but in a different way.
You see, I think, and I've known loads of DJs. One way or another, I think Tony Blackburn is the most sincere DJ, in the sense that if he plays something, he's playing it because he likes it, genuinely. Most DJs are not. They're playing it because they think it's cool to play, or it'll get in with the authorities, or it'll do well, or all those kind of things. Whereas Tony Blackburn has always, right from day one, his personal enthusiasm has been what it's all about. And it's still amazing that there he is. Was he 80 recently?
Yeah, he was.
He was 80. And he still posts these things on Twitter. Every Saturday morning, he turns up to do Sounds of the 60s on Radio 2. And he posts, if you happen to be up early, he'll post a little clip of him going into Broadcasting House.
That's right.
In the perishing cold and snow at about 6 a.m. No, earlier probably.
In a Macintosh.
And he's
having done a 6-mile run.
His motivations have never changed at all, Tony Blackburn. He just loves to be on the radio.
Yeah. Well, he's also a failed pop star, isn't he?
Well, I suppose they all were
dance band singers.
Yeah.
Won't get off that train or something.
Something like
that. I think you're always contractually obliged to if you were a Radio 1 DJ, because you were so well known they thought you'd have a hit. But I don't think his heart was in it.
No, I think he did.
I think he's so sincere. Also, I think he's very influential, actually. I think he's probably got more people turned on to kind of interesting, rare soul music than most other daytime DJs,
So anyway, God bless them all. John Peel, Charlie Gillett, and Tony Blackburn, who's happily is still with us.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
What's the most pleasant, prestigious job in cultural journalism would you say, Mark Hilland?
I know the answer to this. Because very briefly I did it, actually, for a living when I was at the NME, and it's film critic.
Okay.
All right.
But I'm more to the point. I'm going to be more specific than that. Film critic where?
Oh, film critic at the New York Times.
Film critic at the New York Times.
One. Because the thing about film critic is that you get that thrill daily of being in a cinema in the daytime, which feels fatally wrong, but it's very exciting because you're getting paid for it. And you've got a glass of white wine, you've got a handful of cashew nuts. No, the reason we were going to talk about it was that Tony Scott, A.O. Scott, the New York Times film critic, who I think started back in 2000. I think he's been there 23 years. I think he's been reviewing films for about 30 years. He kind of retired this week. He announced he was stepping down. I thought it was a really, really good story. There's a podcast about it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I thought it was an amazing story. He talks about the main reasons. There are two main reasons. And one is the Marvel franchise. He talks about the fact that I think he described the new Avengers film as a giant ATM for Marvel and its studio overlords, the Walt Disney Company. And he effectively said that the new film was rubbish. And there was, of course, massive outcry, including Samuel L. Jackson tweeting about it. And there was a huge Twitter storm when they were basically saying, we've got to find this guy a new job. And he made a really good point about it in the podcast, which is that these films, a large percentage of the films being made now, are kind of critic-proof. He said that there's no argument to be had about them. He talked about this whole idea of fandom, and I really agree with him, actually, because Avengers, Marvel, etc., don't really have, viewers as much as they have a fan base. And that fan base have decided that it's like one gigantic movie which they approve of, and they can't. Some are slightly better than the others, but the concept they will not deal with anybody criticizing or having a go at it. And he says that it's something so powerful that it crushes any dissenting voice, which I thought was a really interesting thing. The other thing he talked about was streaming, the idea of streaming. And he said, obviously when streaming took off, Netflix took off, Netflix started to commission their own movies, and they were giving large amounts of money to people to make the films they always wanted to make. That's great in principle. But he said that not only are things the big success of the time, which would have been Mad Men and Sopranos and Breaking Bad, not only is that soaking up all the time and attention of all the people who could be going to the cinema, but the experience of streaming, which is exactly the same parallel actually as in music, is so different from going to the cinema. I look back at the films that I've had the most impact on me recently, and they've all been ones that I've actually seen in a cinema, because it's an event and you can go back and you can relive the whole thing in your mind. If it's a streaming movie, there's no great onus on you to go out and see it straight away. You're not desperately in need of a critic to tell you to do it. You will just generally find out through the ether when it's any good. And his point is that film criticism is sort of redundant. I thought that was really interesting, actually.
It's interesting you should say this in the same week that Ed Sheeran has suggested that there is no point in album reviews any longer, because with streaming, it's there for you to listen to. You don't have to have somebody to help you decide whether it's worth paying £10 or whatever it is to go and buy a CD. And I think it's a perfectly fair point. But the kind of the counter argument comes from two groups of people who really, really want there to continue to be loads and loads of album reviews, and they'd like them to be on paper and so forth and widely disseminated. One group of people are the thousands of people who make records that nobody will ever hear. I.e. not Ed Sheeran. Yes. Yeah. And the other is
the Observer didn't review me,
I exist. Look, Mum.
Exactly.
And the other is the slightly less numerous group of people who fancy themselves as writing those kind of reviews. The rest of us, we do not give a hoot, do we, at all,
I don't think we do. I mean, I like the idea of reviews. I just don't read very many of them. It's like with film reviews. I never really read film reviews until after I've seen the film. And then I read the longest one possible because I'd like to get into the biggest discussion I possibly could.
Well, famously, there's a woman I worked with when we launched Empire magazine, the film magazine, years ago. And she said something I still think is so true. She said this years ago. Before you've seen the film, the best review is the shortest one.
It's the shortest, that's right.
After you've seen the film, the best review is the longest one.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely true.
It is.
So, with music, if you've arrived at a conclusion about a piece of music and you've known it long enough, you've lived with it long enough, and you're still interested in it, you will read a review about it, quite happily, because you've decided you like it, and the review might enhance your enjoyment.
Yeah, it might point out some perspective you haven't
absolutely
seen.
Or it might challenge it or whatever. But you're not sitting there going, give me permission to like it.
Yeah.
Which I think was the thing that a lot of people still look to reviews for. So, I've got.
And another thing I think is that we've become mistrustful of the fact that people review these things really, really quickly. You're reviewing a stream, you're reviewing a record that you've only heard about once, and you've got to do it because the Uncut or the Sunday Times or whatever we're going to reviews. You've got to get it out. Very briefly, when I was the editor of Q, we had a little thing where we re-reviewed records that we'd reviewed 3 months or 6 months beforehand. I thought it was really valuable, actually.
Yeah.
And actually, look, we've been living with these records now for 6 months, and we can honestly say they really are good, or actually we might have been a bit sulky.
Well, the only thing that matters with a record is, are you still playing it 3 months later?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you've stopped playing it 3 months later, your enthusiasm wasn't justified in the first place, And, so I think there's stuff that you can be tempted to read and will find it worthwhile and so forth. But what is not worthwhile is this kind of processing of, here we go, every week, here's another 10 records, you know what I mean, that are just reviewed out of obligation. And
there's still some value in people following certain critics. I really love Alexis Petridis, the Guardian and Observer, and so if he has anything to say about anything at all, I'm quite interested in reading it. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to go and read the album, or hear the album.
I read Anthony Lane's film reviews in the New Yorker, and I don't go and see more than 5% of the films he writes about. But he's a brilliant reviewer, and he's always got something interesting to say about them, and he always rises above the cliches.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is very, very difficult to do, because if you're reviewing, generally speaking, if you're reviewing records all the time, really all the time, you're unlikely to be getting better at it. You're probably getting worse at it, because
you're getting less enthusiastic about it.
You lose.
It's becoming a chore.
Honestly, I used to find this reviewing the singles, when you did it for weekly music papers, did it for Smash Hits or whatever.
The temptation is just to slag things off because it's so much easier.
Well, so you got to have something to say.
It's much easier to be horrible.
And it's really hard. That's the great truth about reviewing the singles. Everybody in the world used to think, if I could do that, I'd die happy if I could do that every week. And most people just, they just wanted to shoot themselves after they'd done it 3 times, because... Have
you ever been a restaurant critic? I was a restaurant critic briefly, and in a very short space of time, I would sit there going, oh no, this is ruining my meal. Yeah. I've got to think how to describe these courgettes. I just want to just eat them and talk to my pal, have a glass of wine. So we shouldn't be complaining. I mean, there are, as we said at the top of this, there are very few better jobs than being the New York Times film critic. But Tony Scott, A.O. Scott, has given it up, and I kind of admire him for it.
Get your application in.
The Word Podcast, 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
So the news this morning, actually, the day we're recording this, about Seymour Stein, which is very sad. Older than I thought, actually. 80, I think he was. But do you remember we had Seymour Stein on Word in Your Ear? We interviewed him in the pub in Islington in, whatever it was, 2018. I remember it really well for various reasons. One, extraordinary thing that he had, and how many people can say this is a select club, he'd met Buddy Holly.
Yes. Not many
got a job At the age of 13, he got a job, a sort of evening job, helping out on Billboard magazine because he was so obsessed by charts.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah.
And they let him, help compile the charts and help work out the picks of the week for the records that they were rooting for the radio playlists. And one of those days, I think he was 15 or 16, Buddy Holly came into the office. That's an amazing thing.
That's quite something.
We met somebody who'd met Buddy Holly. That was incredible. But the other thing that was interesting is we asked him a lot about what criteria he used to sign people. And, in case people have forgotten, Seymour Stein, president of Sire, also the vice president of Warner Bros., he signed the Ramones, the Talking Heads, Madonna. He signed Depeche Mode and the Smiths and the Cure and the Undertones and all sorts of people. Later, Echo and the Bunnymen and Everything But the Girl from America. But we asked him about signing, and he said the main thing, he said there's two things. One is songs. If they were people who were going to be songwriters, if they hadn't got songs that were good enough, there was not going to be enough of a foundation to build on, which I thought was a mistake. But his main thing was ambition. And he said, if you could tell that somebody had the drive, he described Madonna when he met her, and he was given a demo of Madonna when he just had open heart surgery and he was in hospital. And he said, I need to see this girl right now. And she was brought into his hospital ward. And he'd only got this one demo, and he didn't think the singing was particularly fantastic, but he said that they were good songs. He said her ambition was so incredible. He said she would have walked across fire to have success. And then somewhere in the podcast that we did with him, he said, and in the book that he wrote, actually, he said that ambition is basically dissatisfaction with where and who you are. You are born with demons that you have to harness before they kill you. I thought that was really interesting because, that's the thing you can tell. Okay, if there's some songs there and as long as they're capable of writing something that can be improved, musicianship and all that and stagecraft, those things can be learned.
Yeah.
But if you don't have this absolute desperation to succeed, you may not be worth investing in. I thought that was really interesting.
I was thinking about, in the context of something else this last week, I was thinking about the wonderful piece I read years ago about Ivan Lendl, a former Wimbledon champion, whose daughters are very good golfers. And a big feature I read about him where he talked to a kind of talent spotter in the tennis and golf arena about how they identified potential champions.
Yeah.
And they said, don't particularly look for talent. Talent's, everywhere. There's tons of talent.
Yeah.
What I look for is mad parents.
Oh, wow, that's good.
Mad parents. Now go and look at all the big stars.
Go look at Jenny Murray.
Tennis and Richard Williams, and golf and all. It's mad parents. It's people who are prepared to just almost destroy the family when the child is young, to drive them to go and do what you need to do, to go and live in a foreign country, because that's the way you'll get to be top of the tree. And it doesn't even occur to them what would happen if this went wrong. It just doesn't.
No, it's only one option. You've got to try. At least you try, and if you fail, you fail. So you could say the same about the Beach Boys. You could say the same about the Jacksons. You could say, God, this parallel could be extended all over the place.
Most of us are too sensible, to ever allow our children to be that devoted to one thing, But some people are not like that at all, So Seymour Stein, yes. That's the end of an era.
The podcast where he talked about going over to see bands to sign them. And this is the end of an era too. He gets the call from, a lot of what he did was to trust the opinion of various people. Danny Fields, who told him about the Ramones, the Talking Heads, and Daniel Miller, who tipped him off about Depeche Mode, and Jeff Travis about the Smiths. But he said, Depeche Mode's a classic example. He's told, come and see this band. You've got to sign them for America. He said, when are they next playing? He said, they're playing this evening. And he said that he rang up Concord, and this is obviously fiction because he said it cost $8,000 return. This is just nonsense. It would not have been $8,000 in 1981. But anyway, he flew by Concord and got to Basildon in Essex that evening in order to be able to see Depeche Mode. And I love those kind of stories. I'm sure if Depeche Mode knew he was coming and he couldn't get there till the next day, they would have put on a gig for him. They would have gone played some local pub or something. But still, I like the idea that that's how bands were signed. people charging across the ocean with a gigantic checkbook, So it's still part of that old romantic tradition. It's a good story. It's a very good story.
Talking of legends of rock and roll, we also saw the passing of Keith Reid, the man who wrote Whiter Shade of Pale. And
he did.
Homburg and no end of wrote the lyrics. I mean, he's a kind of almost unique case, isn't he?
Yeah.
Somebody who wrote the lyrics for a very successful band. I suppose that Robert Hunter, who did the same thing for the Grateful Dead, didn't he? And obviously Bernie Taupin with Elton John. But
and who was it who wrote those Cream lyrics?
Pete Brown. Pete Brown wrote quite a few, not all of them.
Yeah.
Wrote some of the better known ones. But Keith Reid always said, don't try. People still trying to ask him what it meant. Like, I never know why people are bothered about what Whiter Shade of Pale.
Well, all the songs that you remember, all the that's why Dylan. By the way, Dylan was so successful. You had no idea what he was writing about. What was it? We skipped the light fandango, turned cartwheels across the floor.
I was feeling
16 festival, crowd called out for more.
And when
16 Festival Virgins who were leaving
for the coast, and when I thought my eyes were open, they might just as well be closed. And so it was that later, when the miller told his tale,
brilliant line.
That her face at first,
just ghostly, turned a whiter shade of pale.
And he just kind of gave those to Gary Brooker and said, "See what you can do with it."
The miller told his tale was brilliant, because I remember at the time that anything with a literary reference in it, and anything that sounded faintly druggy, the room was humming harder as the ceiling flew away. Do you remember that? But anything with literary references...
We called that for another drink the waiter brought a tray.
That's it. But Dylan was all F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot and all those kind of things. You felt they were just a notch above, didn't they? Yeah. It's a brilliant lyric. Fantastic.
You better, what is it? You better take off your Homburg because your overcoat is too long. Which is the follow-up.
Yeah.
And of course you must have written the lyrics for A Salty Dog and all that.
Yeah.
God, that's great stuff.
It is.
And I think I'm right in saying that A Whiter Shade of Pale is the most played record in the history of the BBC radio.
Really?
Yes. They gave it a plaque or something about 10 years ago because, it gets rolled out absolutely all the time.
Wow.
And got, played tons back in the day and still gets played tons now,
Wow.
So it obviously provided a very good living for those people whose name was attached to it.
We then argued about it in court for fairly vigorously.
Well, Matthew Fisher argued about it.
Matthew Fisher claimed he'd written the...
Well, he'd gone down, and Matthew Fisher, played the organ part, did get retrospective.
He got 40% royalty in the end.
I bet he only got... Was it 40%?
Yeah, it was, of the compositional royalty.
But he only got it beyond a certain date, didn't he?
Yeah.
So it wasn't backdated. It wasn't backdated.
Still worth having.
So Keith Reid and the most famous Japanese musician.
Yeah, Ryuichi Sakamoto. Yeah. What a huge name he was when we were at Smash Hits. Do you remember when he made records with... It was Merry Christmas to Lawrence, and then he made that record with David Sylvian. And also I really remember, I think it was Computer Game coming out about 1979, 1980. That was a fantastic record. Do you remember that?
What do you mean, Kraftwerk?
No, it was Computer Game by Yellow Magic Orchestra.
Oh, was it?
No, that was Computer Love by Kraftwerk.
I'm showing my stupidity.
Yeah. Okay. It was fantastic. With that little kind of Oriental theme to it. It was really brilliant. And there weren't many groups, because the big wave of electronic groups, the Human League and the Depeche Mode and, Eurythmics, all that, it all happened in the early 80s. And this was late 70s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The band with no drums. It was all Rolands and Korgs and Syndromes. So it was really ahead of the game. Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. Very young.
The Word Podcast. Clearly, there is no plan.
Any other business? We're joined by Alex Gold.
Hello.
I wanted to mention the piece in The Guardian recently, which I thought was fantastic, which reminds you of just how how much of us is invested in the idea of album sleeves. Do you remember when there was all that stuff about the white VW Beetle on the cover of Abbey Road? And they discovered that it was owned by a local resident. It discovered it had been sold at auction in 1986 for $23,000. I think it's now currently on display in the Volkswagen Museum in Wolfsburg, Germany.
It is.
And interesting, of course, you could see its registration plate, which was LMW281F, which you wouldn't be allowed to do now. You would not be allowed to put a car on the cover of a sleeve without erasing the thing. But no, what made me think of that was that the Guardian piece was about the Volkswagen van, the camper van that appears on the cover of Freewheelin Bob Dylan. And it's the same sort of thing. There's now been a big thing trying to work out who it belonged to. And it just randomly was parked when Dylan and Susie Rotolo are walking down the Jones Street, photographed by Don Hunstein. And they discovered it was owned by a local butcher, I think, called Jack Ubaldi. And he had a store called the Florence Prime Meat Market at 5 Jones Street, which served Jackie Kennedy Onassis and Lily Tomlin and all sorts of people. Anyway, he owned this van and just happened to have parked it there that day. And a year later was sold. And they're trying to find out now if it's still around. Why has it been sent to the crusher? And I just love the idea that we are, all these years later, what is that? I mean, that's 60 years later.
Yeah.
We're sitting here talking about a car that happened to be randomly parked on the cover of an album sleeve. I love it. It's fantastic.
It's 12-inch immortality, isn't it?
It is.
It's if something appeared on the cover of an album, it attains an immortality that nothing else matches, actually.
No, it doesn't.
A book cover doesn't
it doesn't.
that at all, And I suppose also if it's a big album, it's in so many homes, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's they're the most widely seen form of popular art, aren't they? Or they were.
Yeah.
Back in the days when they existed. Now, I've forgotten what the story was. I was trying to think when I wrote a thing about Abbey Road for the Radio Times on the 50th anniversary, so that's 2019. And I think I mentioned the VW. And the guy got in touch who'd owned it.
Oh, really? That's fantastic.
Yeah, he was still with us, because there was some detail on what I can't even remember.
Can you imagine how he felt? He just happened to park it there that afternoon at that moment. And I think there's some shots taken, I don't know, just before they walk across the crossing, whatever. And I don't think it's in those shots. So it's just for a fleeting moment. And there it is, nailed for eternity.
Absolutely.
So
for eternity. Because there's also a guy, an Abbey Road engineer, who that day was taking his car to go and run an errand for his mother and happened to be driving up Abbey Road in the distance just as the picture is taken. So the old family car
is in there,
is frozen for all time.
Wonderful.
It's like the ultimate surveillance picture, isn't it?
It is. It's like Google Street Maps pictures where they kind of nail people doing idiotic things outside houses.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So Alex is back from a life on the ocean wave. You get your land legs again, Alex.
Oh yeah, I got back this morning, and it feels lovely to be back in the normal Muggle world. And it's.
What's the thing you're most looking forward to about not being on a luxury liner?
Not being on a luxury liner, that's in general.
Being able to go for a walk in the country.
I can leave. I can enter or leave a town when I please. I
don't have a tannoy telling you to go to emergency stations every 20 minutes.
Nope, I can cook a meal. I don't have to play Hey Jude for the next God knows how long. The benefits are many.
All right.
Yeah, it's nice to be back, that's for sure.
Well, nice to have you here. So what have we got to talk about in any other business? We've got to talk about June the 3rd.
June the 3rd.
Which is Word in Your Park.
Yep.
And if you haven't already got your tickets, do so quickly. We've announced some of our guests for the day. We've got John Higgs, who's going to be talking about the Beatles, James Bond, and the British psyche. We got Leslie Ann Jones, who's going to be talking about the Rolling Stones, because it'll be 60 years. Is that right? 60 years.
We have another big announcement to make about another big rock. It's going to be 3. It's going to be 4 main themes.
Yeah.
So
there'll be further announcements in the next week. But if you want to get on with it, get your tickets, and we'll put the link underneath. If you've never been to this event before, you may have heard about it from other people who've been. And we've been very fortunate in the last 2 years. We've been blessed by very clement weather. And but it sort of doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. It's under canvas. It's fantastic. Open-sided tents, gorgeous.
It's a covered auditorium, very comfortable, and we're not afraid to make the boast that it has the most salubrious lavatories of any outdoor event in London. Is that true?
These things matter. Oh yeah, absolutely.
They damn well matter.
It does.
Not that we're going to be terribly straining anybody's bladder, because the whole thing starts about 2 and finishes no later than 4:30 with an interval in the middle. So, you can go off. And
the rest of the day is yours.
The rest of the day is yours. London is your is there at your disposal. So, come one, come all. Bring the family. Do join us. It'd be lovely to see people. Opportunities to get books bought and signed and so forth. And, lots more details coming up over the next few weeks. But all the details and a link to how you can buy tickets directly below this.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.